Cities are defined by their cultures. Those cultures could entail sports or business or certainly arts and entertainment. Oklahoma City is thriving in all of these areas. But who makes that all happen? This Town OKC explores the people behind the cultures, their origins, their motivations, their challenges, and their dreams. I'm Rick Allen Lippert. I've been in this town for over 50 years with a front row seat to seeing the culture grow from a dusty bus stop on the Southern Plains to a flourishing destination. Join me as we meet the folks behind the culture on This Town OKC. And This Town OKC is brought to you by Carpenter Square Theater, where we are recording this podcast today in the rehearsal studio. Joy Reed Belt, here's what I know about you. I recall seeing the sign for your company at 50th and Western for years and years, Joy Reed Belt and Associates.
Right.
And then I became familiar with you after you married John, or I guess you already married John.
Yes, I was.
But all that stuff with the Paseo and the Elms, that is what it's called, right? The Elms. Now JRB Gallery. So that I've now told you everything I know about you. I know that you're the preeminent art dealer in town.
Well, that's a good thing. I work with a wonderful project. But my life with arts, it began when I was very young. And my father was a Baptist preacher. I was born in Louisville while he was getting his doctorate at the seminary. And so church music, you know, is very important in any kind of worship, usually. And so from the time I was really little, I was expected to sing. And then it got to where I had to sing solos in order to get my allowance. And then when I was in high school, in order to get a car, I had to sing on the radio. And so I did that, and I got my dad thought I was a little adventurous, I think, when I was young. And I wanted to go to college in either New York or Europe. And he just said, you just scare me to death. You know, I can't even think about that.
And where was his church?
At that time, it was in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And so he said, but he had, you know, most Protestant preachers move around periodically, and they get called to a larger church, you know. But we were in Fort Smith when I graduated from high school. And he wanted me to go to a Baptist college, and I complained mightily. And then he said, well, if you'll go for 1 year and make straight A's, then I'll send you anywhere in the world. But he knew I would go and make friends and not want to leave. So I went to Ouachita Baptist College, and I sang, and it was in the choirs and all that. And then I got connected somehow to the drama department. And so I loved the drama department, and I became a drama major, and I graduated with a drama degree.
From Ouachita College?
Okay. And my last semester there, some people came recruiting teachers, and one of the places was Rogers, Arkansas. They came and they wanted somebody to start a speech and drama department. And so that just sounded terrific. They had a nice high school, good record. The kids that were talented went over to Fayetteville. You know, they had summer camps and things for them, but there wasn't an institutional program in the high school. So I went over there and started that. I remember the first play we did, I don't know how it got selected, but it was Tea House of the August Moon. And I can remember the parents coming to help me build the bridge and everything. And then, and I remember we started debating some and going to contests. And I remember I had this one guy that did Catcher in the Rye, was real big then. And he did Holland Caulfield, you know, Catcher in the Rye, and toured and everything. And so that did really well, and I started working on a master's at the University of Arkansas, and then ended up moving to Fayetteville, and went to school there and got a couple of masters, and then I was recruited to go to Tulsa and I went to Tulsa at Tulsa Junior College and started teaching speech and creative writing and drama and things like that. It was when they first opened on Boston Avenue. And when I got there, it was a very unusual time. It was the end of the Vietnam War, and all these young men were coming back. I was younger than my students in some cases, and they were coming back, and some of them were pretty messed up. And I had a couple of quadriplegics, and then some that had just shut down emotionally. And I kind of used what we now call arts integration to reach them. And I went over to Leon Russell's house, and they all tried to. All the guards come out and everything. I said, "Listen, I'm not a groupie. I want to talk to your boss about working with my students." And so he came and did a couple of things at the school, and the Gap Band was there. They did some things, but I started doing more programs, and I was writing grants, getting funding from the endowment. So then one day somebody called and said there was somebody going to be in town that wanted to talk to me about working for the National Endowment for the Arts. And they came to Oklahoma, to Tulsa, and I talked to them, but they wanted me to do some of the things I'd been doing, also work with Native Americans, and but be in Oklahoma City for 2 years, and then I was to go to Washington. But I'd be going back and forth a lot. And so I took that job, and that's how I came to Oklahoma City. And that's how the whole Paseo journey kind of started. That when I came here, you used to, I'm sure it's all online now, but there used to be something printed out that you got every week called the Federal Register. And it told you all of the departments or agencies, federal agencies that gave grants. So I'm just reading it one day in my office at the Jim Thorpe building, and it had a Comprehensive Employment Training Act, CETA. And it listed, CETA, and it listed the qualifications, and you had to be underemployed, essentially, unemployed or underemployed. And there were 7 or 9 criteria. It was an odd number, I remember. And artists met every one of those. Because, see, I'd met a lot of artists through the Arts Council. And Betty Price and I started on the same day. And so I had met all these artists, and I kept reading this, and I thought, goodness, I mean, this is wonderful for artists. I've got to write a grant. So I called the endowment, and I said, could you tell me what states have used the CETA money so I can call them and see what they wrote and everything? And they said they have to check, and they called me back, and they said, Joy, you've made a mistake. That's labor money. It comes from the Department of Labor. It doesn't come from arts money. And it's called, Comprehensive Employment Training Act. And it's for plumbers and underemployed. And I said, but it doesn't say that. I said, the criteria here fits every artist I know. And I said, could I write a grant anyway? What would happen? Am I allowed to write a grant from another agency? So they said they'd have to check, and they checked with Nancy Hanks, who was the director of the NEA at that time. And she called back and said, knock yourself out. Try. She said, don't be upset if you don't get it. And so I wrote this. Well, then I found out that if there was any CETA money in your state, you couldn't have 2 accounts exactly. You had to cooperate and integrate the programs. And the city of Oklahoma City had a very small one that a man named Roosevelt Turner managed. So I went to talk to him, and he was very negative at first. And he told me I wouldn't get it, and he wasn't going to work with me. And, you know, he was protective. He said, I've got this many positions funded. You know, in order for you to get that money means I have to give up. Because only so much is going to be coming to the state. And I just got my people hired, and I don't want to give up. And he was pretty harsh in how he talked to me about it. We became friends later. And so I looked around his office, and there was a guitar hanging. And I said, is that your guitar? And he said, yes. And I said, are you in a band? Yes, everybody knows I'm in it. I have 2 bands, you know. And I said, okay. And I said, well, where do you play? And it was on Lincoln Boulevard, as I remember, kind of close to where the Tokyo Gardens used to be, kind of maybe 50th and Lincoln, somewhere around there. It was some club. So I showed up that Friday night and shocked him. And then I came back the next Friday night. And, you know, he was on stage, and he stopped the music, came down to my table, and said, this is not going to work. You know, you're coming out and seeing me play is not going to soften my heart. But I ended up getting a seat of money. And so and John Belt at that time was the president of the Arts Council. And so what it had to do, it had to go through a fiduciary, a municipal. It couldn't go to the state. Had to go through a municipal agency that could disseminate it. Well, the Arts Council had all these member organizations like Omniplex, the Symphony, the Museum. And so they were the natural. And I worked with Marilyn Myers, who was alive then. And the first grant I wrote, we funded 17 positions. And I know George Oswald was one of those artists. Patrick Riley was one of those artists. Paul Medina was one. These 3 names I remember because I've shown their work in my gallery since then, and they've reminded me. But anyway, we got that program started, and John had to sign off on it as president of the Arts Council. So that was how I met him. And we started dating, and his office was at the High Tower building downtown, and my office was at the Jim Thorpe building, and we didn't have either one of us very long for lunch. So Paseo was just kind of a natural. There was a little restaurant where Picasso's is called Hiram's. And Hiram's had toaster ovens all around the room. And you built I used to say, he came from California. And I used to say that he's the person that brought bean sprouts and cream cheese to Oklahoma City and avocados. And you would make your sandwich and he would weigh it. I don't know how that made much sense because the price points between turkey and cream cheese probably aren't compatible. But, and that's where we ate. And one day, a couple of those toaster ovens caught on fire. We weren't there, but the building was greatly damaged. And the landlord did not know Hiram had a restaurant there. He didn't have a permit. Nothing was up to code. And so when the fire marshals came, when the fire marshal came and everything, of course, they shut him down and penalized him. And somebody said, you know, that man that comes here 2 or 3 times a week with the blonde is a lawyer, and he likes the arts, and maybe he'll help you. So he showed up down there, and they were going to evict him and throw him out of the restaurant. And, well, they did for a while. And then John ended up buying the restaurant and getting very involved and very interested in Paseo. So when my 2 years was up, you know, I was offered to go to D.C. to work. But by that time, I was in love with John, and I didn't really know what to do. And I thought, well, everybody up there has their doctorate, and I just have some hours toward it. I think I'll see if I can get a 2 years leave of absence, and I'll move to Norman and finish my doctorate. And that's what I ended up doing. I mean, the endowment laughed at me, and at first they said, "You've been with us 2 years. You think you're good? We don't have paid leaves." And I said, "Well, you don't have to pay me. If you could just assure me that you'll hire me back in some capacity, because it's such a cool place to work." And so they finally said they would, but I never went back. But I went to Norman, and then I switched. I got the first non-disciplinary doctorate. That was just a new thing that came out. You know, America vacillates between being specialized and being generalist. You know, if you know a little bit about everything, will you make more inventions than if you just know everything about one thing? And this was a time when Harvard and Stanford had indicated that they were giving interdisciplinary doctorates. They thought you needed to be the whole person. So OU regents had just voted that they would do it. And otherwise, it would have been so difficult because I had hours in so many things and I wasn't specialized. So I didn't have to give up too many hours. I could just add on and get my doctorate. And I got it through the college. The interdisciplinary doctorate at first went through the College of Continuing Education, and adult and continuing education. And I ended up with a lot of psychology and everything like that. And when and at that time, OU had the largest adult education program in the world. I mean, they were doing it for the American Bankers Association, you know, for everybody all over the world. They had contracts. And so when I married John, I'm still commuting and going to work down there. I started to work for them. They offered me a job right when I graduated. And
what year did you get your doctorate?
I think 1977.
Okay.
And so they gave, I was commuting. And then I was thinking, well, maybe I just start my own consulting firm, because OCU had called me wanting me to start an adult education center for them. That's when, you know, they were having trouble with the law school. And they were in financial. And so they knew this continuing education was paid for by adults. And so they wanted to start a program. So they called me and wanted me to start a program and be housed up here. And then I talked to my mentor at OU, and I said, OCU's called me, and they want to hire me. And he said, well, we're getting ready to offer you quite an upgrade down here. Or he said, we'd use you as a consultant if you want to do that. So I decided to start my consulting business. And those two places were my first clients. And one of the first programs I remember I did for OCU was we brought Wharton School of Business here to do finance and accounting for non-financial managers, you know, a 3-day course and everything. But I started, that was how I started. I started in my home, and then it grew and grew, and then I had that office next to Phillips for many years.
John got started in Paseo by buying the building that was Hiram's, now Picasso.
Yes.
What came next, and how involved were you with all of that?
It was his. I mean, when he bought it, he called me at the office, and his voice sounded terrible. You know, Joy. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, you know, I have child support and I have alimony, and I just bought. By the end of the day, he had bought 2 buildings, Hiram's and the other one next door. And he said, I bought 2 derelict buildings in the Paseo, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And I said, you know, I had to go to a meeting at the Capitol, and I said, you know, don't worry, we'll talk about it. But one of the things that I had noticed for the endowment, and that he knew too, and sometimes he would, depending on how many days I would be gone, like he'd meet me at Santa Fe or something like that. And what everywhere you went, if you were going to talk about the arts or be on a panel or something like that, the organizing group would take you to the part of town that they considered artsy. Like in Santa Fe, they would always take you to eat at Canyon Road. St. Louis has a place, almost every place. And we saw those. in other cities. And so John said, Oklahoma City does not have that, but this would be perfect. It's only the Paseo Drive is 2.5 blocks long, maybe 3 if you stretch it. It's 2.5 miles from downtown, which is your highest concentration of buyers at that time. And the buildings are so small that they won't work for much commerce or huge offices, but they're perfect for little art galleries and studios. And then he was very familiar with the history of Nan Sheets, who was there on Walker in her place before Nichols even built Paseo Drive.
No kidding.
Yeah, she was there before him. And her house was that Spanish Revival architecture.
And Nan was she was at OU, wasn't she?
No, she was from around Chicago. And she went to pharmacy school. And she got her pharmacy degree when she was 17. While she was in school, Fred Sheets was a doctor studying medicine from here in Oklahoma, Bartlesville, I think. And he went to where she was in med school to study pharmacology. Where she was in pharmacy. He wanted to understand what he was prescribing. And he met her there, and he fell in love with her, and he courted her there. But she wanted to go, she went to Salt Lake City to be a pharmacist. She had a brother there. And she did that before she married him and moved here. And she had painted a little bit. Her mother was a painter. But even when she was a little girl, her mother would take her into Chicago to get her school clothes and everything, and always take her to the Chicago Art Institute. So she was aware that developed communities had an art scene. And she came to Oklahoma City, and we had nothing. And so in the beginning, over 100 years ago when she built the house, she would take her furniture and everything out of the living room 4 times a year and have an art show. And she went every summer to the Broadmoor, had an art institute at that time, and Berger Sanson was there, and some more well-known painters, and she studied with them. But she came back and she started the Beaux-Arts. She did everything to promote the arts in Oklahoma because she realized and then Franklin Roosevelt appointed her head of the WPA for Oklahoma.
I had no idea.
Yes, and so she was one of the few women in America that had that role in any state. And that just so happened to come about the same time that OU hired Oscar Jacobson, and OSU had hired Dole Reed, and OCU had hired Edna Stevenson. So Nan was able to get them funding for different things, to get Jacobson funding to help foster Native art. She did really creative things, like she bought silk screen presses and put them out in different communities to make posters and all kinds of things. But she was all into all of that. And then she started a temporary museum on the 3rd floor of the Civic Center, which was a WPA building. And I think it's still the only sidewalk in Oklahoma City that doesn't have cracks in it. I go down there sometimes and look for cracks. Now, they may have, without my knowledge, they may be down there repaving it every day. But anyway, I go check, and I think that, her sidewalk is still really good. And so she really started our art scene. Then when the WPA money ran out, it was a government appropriation. It just stopped overnight because it was a presidential decree. And when that happened, she had been talking to John Kirkpatrick about a permanent museum because she had a lot of WPA art. And then she gave quite a bit of money, and they built the museum on the fairgrounds. And then she was its director for 31 years out there. And then we remember Carolyn Hill finally moved back to town, and it moved to downtown.
Right.
But she, in my mind, because of the WPA affiliation and starting the museum, is just maybe the most important certainly woman, but person in the formation of the arts as we know them in Oklahoma.
Wow, I had no idea. And somehow in my mind, I thought she was connected with OU in some way.
No, she never had a faculty position.
Okay, well.
But she took, when they were building the houses in Heritage Hills and everything, she took the women that were building those houses to Europe to buy art, on trips, and took them all over and fostered them. And she was just so important. Then after Fred Sheets died, he died before she did, she left the building and moved to Heritage Hills. But by that time, it had kind of become dangerous down there. And it was still dangerous when we started getting involved. But she was already gone, and she had sold that building, and it had become a daycare center when John was finally able to buy it. And it was really in bad shape, truly in bad shape.
So you and John renovated her old house, and that's where
the
JRB Gallery is now.
And he got me. I mean, I'm off doing business thing and being a business consultant, over there on Western. But he always tried to get me involved in the Paseo, and I was traveling a lot. I don't know if you remember, we had a big recession and all the outplacement happened, and I was a pioneer in outplacement, and I was traveling all over the world. And one night he came in with a package, and there was a woman who had a studio on Paseo who made theater costumes. I can't remember her name, but you might have heard of her. And that was her shop. And John went over and had her make me a smock. And I had a bow tie, plaid bow tie, and a beret. And he had it gift wrapped. And he said that for me to take art lessons. And I was so shocked. I never painted or anything. I was so shocked. And so I said, John, I mean, why? He said, you've got to relax. You're working too hard on this business stuff, and it's all this psychology and all this depression you're having to deal with it because of people losing their jobs. He said, it's too much. And he said, you need something to lift you up. And so I said, well, just send me to Canyon Ranch and let me get some massages. And I can't paint. And he said, you'll be great. You're the most creative person I know. You'll be great. So I started taking lessons with Kaor on Thursday nights. Mm-hmm. And that's where I met one of my great friends almost 40 years ago, Kelly Barnes, and was in the same class. And so I started...
We have a Kaor painting in our house.
Yeah. And so I started getting involved, but mainly the design of Paseo, acquiring the buildings, getting the plunge, making the decisions. I mean, he would talk to me about these things, but he was the lead and he was the pioneer. And I was painting on Thursday nights, and somebody came up to me and asked me if I would share her studio and help pay rent to my husband. That she was that her partner had lost her job, and they were going to have to move to Texas, and that this woman's husband wouldn't give her any more money for rent. So she said, everybody knows John Belt's wife's painting. Would you come and help me pay rent to him and share my space? And I said, well, where is it? And she said, well, it's between Claude Anderson and Mike Larson. And I thought, you know, Joy, if you're trying to learn how to paint, that's not a bad address.
Not a bad place.
And so I started doing that, and I got more involved. And, you know, of course, he would always come get me to go to lunch. And when he was picking colors for buildings, I did do a lot of the picking of the colors. And in fact, when he was dying, when they came in and told him he was dying in the hospital, and they said that he had maybe 4 months to live, but he lived 3 days. But he called me over by the side of the bed when the doctors walked out. And he said, I need to talk to you about Paseo. Do you have your laptop? And I said, did you not hear what they just told you? And he said, yes, I don't have much time. And there's a lot I need to tell you. And I said, John, I can't do this. And he took my hand and kissed it and laid it back on the bed. And he said, just think, honey, you can paint these buildings any color you want with no discussion. Because he would pick me up and he'd say, I want you to go down the street. You have 10 minutes. Go down the street and see what you think. And we'd get down there and I'd say, you painted a restaurant purple? He'd say, I knew I shouldn't have gotten to you, but I thought for once you'd like this color. You know, so it was kind of a joke between us. But it was, the community was his vision and everything. And then when he got Nan Sheets' house, I started reading about that. And he sent me a couple of articles about her, sent them to my office and said, you know, just wrote a little sticky on there. I think you would have liked this lady. And I read about all she had done and everything, and I got interested. And I went down there, and I'm looking in the windows and everything. And what I was going to have is half of a studio that the lady left after I got there, and I had ended up having a small gallery. I didn't paint there very much, but I was doing, in that space, I was having First Friday, and I was the only one in it. And so several artists had said, you know, I wish you would grow your, you know, they would ask me if they could, you know, be in my gallery. And I said, I'm out of space. And so people were saying, I wish you had more room. And so he got that building, and I got kind of interested because it's a cool building. It's a very interesting building. And I got kind of interested in it. And I told him, I said, John, he had a husband and wife that went in there first. And I said, you know, if for some reason they don't work out, I wish you'd consider leasing it to me. And he said, well, no. He said, you're doing too much. You know, you're still working the other job and you're doing this and that. And he said, that's ridiculous. And I said, just keep it in mind. I said, I think it'll be my last act. I said, I don't know how old I'll be that I could work like I'm doing now and travel like I'm traveling now. But I said, I think that I could always be rolled around in a wheelchair and point a cane and tell somebody I had to move a painting. And I said, I think it's my last act. And so sure enough, when that couple didn't make it, he came to me and he said, he said, I'm just struggling with this. I don't know if this is a good idea. But he said, you asked me to let you know if they ever left and you wanted to. And he said, do you still want it? And I said, yes, I think I would love to have it. And before he died, so I was able to have it a few years before he died. But several times before he died, he would, Joy, I'm just so proud with what you did. I never expected it. I'm so proud.
Very nice.
And he said, I can die in peace because he said, you don't do what I do on Paseo, but you understand it so much. And so you'll make and get the kind of help you need. So that was good. There's some kind of serendipity to all that.
Yeah. Well, no doubt the city owes John and you as well a huge debt of gratitude for saving the Paseo and keeping it vibrant.
And it's a special place.
It really is. It's
a special place. And so I'm so glad and it worked out. You know, him being a lawyer, he knew historical statutes, and to see all that would have thrown me a little bit. But he knew what to do, and but he loved it. He enjoyed it, and it was his. It probably surpassed golf as his hobby.
So when do you recall opening JRB Gallery?
I took the front room, one room, probably in 2003. And we had to do a little renovation. Even the ceilings in the main gallery, there's all that old plaster up there. But the ceilings had been dropped, and there was acoustical tiles, and there were holes in the wall and holes in the floor. And we started restoring it, and I think I took that very front room, and we kind of did it gradually. That building was built on the initial building, the large gallery, the main gallery. She had that for a while, and then when she started teaching art, her husband added what we call the ship gallery, and that's the gallery on the north that has the ship tiles in the fireplace.
Which is a very cool little space of its own.
And
with its own kitchen.
But each of the spaces. And then later, when she wanted to start a gallery, and not just live there, then she built my wing on. So if you look at the front, there are 3 front doors facing Walker. All of them have a different number. All of them have bathroom and kitchen. And so I continue to keep them separate, and I get all those utility bills and everything. And then there's a 4th on 27th, because this allows me flexibility. If I get to where I can't work, or I don't want to do as much, or I want to lease out, then I can just lock and secure the doors between the different spaces, and I could have 3 or 4 galleries there. If I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because I added on, I gradually took them off. So I've kept it all separate.
But your office is now on that south end.
Yes. And there's another space on 27th. Mine's still facing Walker, that we use to receive art, and then we put art we take down in there to give back to people. That's how we use the 27th Street.
Okay. But
the last one on the south is my wonderful office suite.
Yes, it is.
It is fabulous.
It really is.
So most people ask me if I live there. And I could, I guess.
Of course. Do you still have your consulting business?
No, I gradually and thoughtfully and consciously let that go. And I had to do that when he died, because then I had to take over Paseo.
Right.
And so I had a gallery. I had this very demanding consulting business. And then I had the Paseo properties. And so I had to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And so I thought and I remember Aubrey McClendon was very upset. I mean, he came to me several times after John died, wanting me to find CEOs for companies he was starting, and very upset. But that consulting, I gave up so that I could do the gallery and I could manage the properties. And then now we're working, I've got some good help, good professionals helping me. And what I want the Paseo to continue after me. So we're in the process of setting up a foundation that I can transfer the properties to, so that it will keep being managed and not be sold off individually. so that Oklahoma City will always have an arts
Well,
district.
thank you for planning the future like that.
Yeah. It's sad. I mean, it's hard. It's hard, but I'm okay with it now. But it was, at first, it's kind of hard to think about when you won't be around, you know. But we're working on the legal parts of it now so that there will always be a place for artists. They are the bravest people I know, as you know, in any kind of art. I mean, there's nothing guaranteed.
Right. Yeah.
There's no salary. I mean, you know, you can paint a painting. You have no idea if anybody's going to buy it. But I think we need places that, just as we need museums where we can reflect on art and appreciate art, we need creative spaces where that art can be made and made available to individuals. So I see it. I see it as a necessary thing, but that's what's going on right now.
And not just the visual arts. What you folks have done to support Oklahoma Shakespeare
Oh yeah.
with their space. Thank you for that. That's
Yeah, I think it needs to be, you know, visual, performing. We've got the bookstore, the literary
oh
arts.
yes.
And they're doing all kinds of creative writing
They are.
seminars and everything like that. And I would like to have more dance, I think, more movement.
What was the dance company? Once Upon a Star Dance?
Swan. And she was there for 34
Yes.
years. And she worked primarily with children
Right.
and bringing them. But I don't have that function replaced. But whatever we can do. In fact, the bookstore just expanded and took 2 storefronts. So they expanded and took the space that Stardance Swan had for 33 years.
Before we wrap up, I want to revisit one of my favorite memories of interacting with you.
Oh, dear.
First Fridays, gallery walk, you would have an opening on a Friday and lay out a nice spread of food. Our mutual friend Willard Johnson,
Yes.
Willard and I and my wife and some others, Carolyn Ferris, had a bowling team that we put together one time for some charity event, and we sprung for matching shirts.
I see.
And so there were 5 or 6 of us all wearing these matching shirts, and we hit your opening on our way to go bowling one Friday evening. And they had gone around and grazed in the table and whatnot, and I think you had shrimp and stuff.
Oh,
I mean,
I
it was a
did.
nice spread. And as the evening went on, we were there over an hour, I think, and I finally got into the room where the food was, and I remember you coming up to me and berating me for eating all of your food, and I had just gotten there.
Oh, really?
And I was a little taken aback, and I in my mind I want to say you huffed off, and then after we left, it occurred to me that we were all wearing the same shirt.
I see.
And I mean, and so what you saw was the
That's
shirt
exactly
at
right.
the table,
Well, we did.
and you saw shirt after shirt after shirt.
And my favorite line.
We made up afterwards.
Oh, but
when
my
we
favorite
realized-
line, and probably what I said to you, because my favorite line to use in that situation is, "This is not supper."
I believe you did say that.
That's what I would occasionally say to people. This is not supper. I still say that sometimes, because we have had. There are different reasons for why we've had just fabulous food. I've been lucky enough to know chefs that work in restaurants or stuff, and they've called me from time to time over the years and say, I'm working. I know when Iguana was getting started, Robert called me, and we had a lot of chips and everything, and he was trying out dips. And we tried to get people to vote on the dips and the sauces, and that got too complicated with the big crowd. but then we would just measure how quickly they would go through it, what would be popular.
Yeah.
And that helped him, and we did a little things like that for some Picasso recipes and everything. And so we got known, I think, as this food haven.
Yes.
And like you said, somebody might have brought shrimp for some reason. I don't know why we would have gotten shrimp. But it was very, very expensive. But then we found that the same people were doing all the eating, and that the other people were more conscious of what was getting gone. But my favorite line is, even if it's people I know and they're just pigging out on something, I'll walk by and I'll say, "This is not supper." and keep walking. But when you have shrimp or you have something that you have to heat and cook, and the same person just comes, and they come every first Friday, and they do the same thing, and they go sit in the same chair and to do it. I really think "This is not supper" is kind of mild. I mean,
Exactly.
but that's a dance all gallerists have.
Joy Reed-Bell, thank you so much. If I didn't tell you before, the whole purpose of this podcast is to focus on the people behind the culture of Oklahoma City.
Well, that's great.
And you've given me such a wonderful lesson on the history of the culture. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, Rick. And congratulations on Carpenter Square.
Thank you. So this has been This Town OKC. I'm Rick Allen Lippert. This is sponsored by Carpenter Square Theater, and it's a Lippert Media production.